So where would every championship club finish if your previous manager was in charge for this season? Let's take a look. Guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Bit of a fun one coming at you today, but I enjoyed very much compiling this list of what I realistically think the championship table would look like if your previous manager was in charge for this season. I want to get your guys' thoughts on this down below. The way I've gone ahead and built this list is I've taken each championship club's previous manager. However, it has to be a manager who wasn't at your club at all this season. So say for example, technically now Preston's previous manager is Alex Neil, as he's parted ways with us. I'm going to be using the manager before him. And so if there has been a managerial sacking at your club this season, I'm going to be taking the manager from before that sacking, if you're following along with me. As always guys, if you do go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do check out the Patreon link that is down below. Massive thank you to everyone that has signed up. But without any further ado, let's jump into this one. Coming in 24th place, and perhaps quite unsurprisingly, we do have Wycombe Wanderers under the management of Gary Waddock. Now, when Gary Waddock was sacked by Wycombe Wanderers, they were sat 21st in League Two. So he doesn't inspire me with all too much hope that he could do a better job with this current Wycombe squad than Gareth Ainsworth, who's worked wonders to get them into this current position. Now, Gary Waddock was in charge at Wycombe for a fair amount of time actually, from 2009 to 2012, in charge of over 140 games, but realistically he doesn't do a better job here than Ainsworth, does he? Not to any extent. Coming in 23rd place in the championship, we're then going to have Coventry under the management of Russell Slade. Now, there would have been absolutely no chance of Coventry even making it to the championship if they stuck out with Russell Slade. He had a win percentage of just 18%, winning just 3 of the 16 games he was in charge for at Coventry, and ultimately it was after his departure that Mark Robbins came in and really turned the tide at Coventry. But yeah, Russell Slade doesn't fill me with all too much confidence that he'd be able to keep this Coventry side up. After working at Coventry, he's had work at Grimsby and Hereford, but yeah, not cut out for championship life, I don't think. Coming in 22nd place and also getting relegated, we then have Rotherham United under Kenny Jackett. Now, this was a really weird managerial appointment at the time. Kenny Jackett only lasted 39 days in the Rotherham job before handing in his resignation. He clearly didn't want to be at the club, so over a full season, I'm not sure how inspired he'd actually be to keep this group of players up. Now, Kenny Jackett himself isn't necessarily a bad manager, but his short stint at Rotherham was bizarre to say the least. In the 5 games he was in charge for, they won none of them, losing 4 and drawing 1. With that sort of record, you're going down. Coming in 21st place and just avoiding relegation, we then have Luton Town under Graham Jones. Now, the only reason they're avoiding the drop in this particular video under Jones is quite simply because of the previous managers have just been a level below, but Graham Jones at Luton was not a good fit. If we've seen how Nathan Jones has elevated this pretty much same group of players since Graham has left, it's night and day between the two managers here. You know, when Graham Jones ultimately departed Luton last season, they were sat 23rd in the championship, and to see how they're now striving forward under Nathan Jones, the previous management was just a bit uninspiring, really. 20th place, we have Steve Bruce's Sheffield Wednesday. Obviously, Sheffield Wednesday have had loads of previous managers this season, but if we're taking one that hasn't been in charge of them this season, the latest one to go to is Steve Bruce, who, to be honest, isn't very well liked anywhere at the moment, to be honest with you. Newcastle fans don't like him. I don't think that Sheffield Wednesday fans hold him in particularly high regard after he left the club to go to Newcastle. Villa fans don't particularly like him. However, saying that, while Bruce was in charge at Sheffield Wednesday, they weren't actually all too bad, to be honest with you. It was just a bit of a shame of how he went about leaving in the end. But yeah, Steve Bruce's Sheffield Wednesday probably keeps them up, doesn't he? Coming in 19th place, we then have Barnsley under Daniel Stendel. Obviously, Barnsley's most recent previous manager is Gerhard Struber, but as he was in charge at the start of this season, we're going back to Daniel Stendel for Barnsley, who, don't get me wrong, wasn't a bad manager. Obviously, got them promoted to the championship. However, would Barnsley have gone on this miraculous run of making it into the top 6 had Stendel still been there? I don't know. Maybe they did need that transition of a few more managers to get into the position that they are in now under Ishmael. When Stendel ultimately departed Barnsley, they were sat 23rd in the championship. They were conceding a lot of goals. I think his last game actually was against my side, North End, when we absolutely ripped through them, scoring 5 goals. Very likeable manager, but I don't quite think they'd be in the position that they are now had he still been there. In 18th place, we're then going to have Stoke under Nathan Jones. This is a really bizarre one because on one side of things, Stoke have a reasonable championship squad at the moment. On the other side of things, I don't think Nathan Jones is a bad football manager, but the combination of the two was just a bit of a disaster, really, wasn't it? He was not suited to this Stoke squad whatsoever. In the 38 games he was in charge for, he had a win percentage of just 15.8%. I mean, he's proved since going back to Luton that he's more than a capable manager at this level, but Stoke and Nathan Jones just did not work out. So for that reason, I think it would be quite the drop-off in the Championship with them. 17th place, we have Birmingham under Pep Clotter. Pep was an interesting manager at Birmingham, I think it's fair to say. In the early days, they started out playing some quite bright, exciting football moving forward. Towards the end of his tenure, though, things just went stale quite quickly, didn't they? They went on that bad run of form, and ultimately he wasn't really able to rekindle that same spark that they had at the start of the season. Maybe that was a lack of experience showing or something like that. But even under Clotter, did things get as bad as they have got for Birmingham this season? Probably not. So for that reason, around 17th, I'd have them. 16th place, we have Middlesbrough under the management of Jonathan Woodgate. Now, the first thing to point out is that this Middlesbrough squad right now is better than the one that Jonathan Woodgate had. But ultimately, I think that Woodgate's lack of experience in that Borough job ultimately showed, especially towards the end when they were ultimately, looking down at the possibility of being relegated to League One. He tried to incorporate a different brand of football into Borough, and ultimately it didn't really work out for him. But yeah, this current squad under Jonathan Woodgate, I'll have them around 16th. 15th place, we then have Blackburn Rovers under the management of Owen Coyle. Blackburn, for me, I've said it countless times on the channel so far, I think have been a fairly underachieving club so far this season. That squad there, I think, is more than capable of battling in and around the top 6. Would Owen Coyle be the right man to take this Blackburn side forward? Probably not, to be honest with you, probably not. So I've got them in a very similar part of the table. I think the club now has got a little bit more stability off the pitch than when Coyle was previously in charge. But yeah, ultimately they probably don't go much better than how they're doing under Mowbray at the moment. 14th place, I've got Huddersfield under Danny Cowley, so quite a bump up in the table compared to where they are now. Now, the obvious thing to say would be that the style of play would be drastically different for Huddersfield this season had they kept on with Danny Cowley. Ultimately they made that decision to part ways with him, go for Carlos Corberán, go for a different brand of football. But I can't help but feel like Danny Cowley would have had Huddersfield like a bit of a regimented, hard to beat side. The quality in that squad, it can be a little bit few and far between at times, especially with the amount of injuries that they picked up this season. But yeah, I can't help but feel like under Danny Cowley that they just grinded out the results this season and would have seen them, guided them to sort of a mid-table finish. 13th place, we have QPR under Steve McLaren. Now, this is one that could very much go either way, to be honest with you. Steve McLaren's time at QPR was strange, to say the least. They got off to an absolutely horrific start. I think it was on like the second day of the season when they shipped 7 goals to West Brom, and from that point onwards they looked like a certainty for relegation. But then slowly he started to get his ideas across, they started playing some decent football, and they actually moved up the league quite steadily. But then it hit the new year and they went on this awful winless run, and ultimately Steve McLaren was sacked. Now, McLaren's an interesting one because I don't think he's a necessarily bad coach, but as a manager he probably just lacks one too many characteristics. So yeah, I'd have QPR somewhere in the middle under Steve McLaren, but a very unpredictable manager. 12th place, I've got Millwall under Neil Harris. Neil Harris and Millwall, you know what to expect from them, really, don't you? Ultimately, when Millwall did part ways with Neil Harris, I do think it was the right decision. But yeah, he'd probably get this squad in and around mid-table, to be honest with you. Maybe a little bit lower than that. But since leaving Millwall, obviously managed to get that Cardiff squad into the playoffs, I think Millwall will be safer on mid-table under Harris, to be honest with you. Next up, in 11th place, of course, it's going to be Preston North End under Simon Grayson. In the 2 seasons that Grayson was in charge for of Preston being in the Championship, we had back-to-back 11th finishes, so who's to say that he wouldn't have gone for a 3rd time lucky in that 11th spot. Simon Grayson was always a manager who we felt like we were quite content with in the Championship. He very much stabilised us in that position, but for another manager to take us on to that next level, we never quite felt it was Grayson. Obviously, we managed to sort of get onto that new level, but since have regressed under Alex Neil. So yeah, Simon Grayson around 11th for this North End squad. In 10th place, we got Reading under Mark Bowen. Mark Bowen's an interesting one because Reading weren't awful under him, but would they have gone to that next level under Mark Bowen like they have done under Paunovic this season, really challenging for the top 6? Probably not. I think the squad now is a little bit better than what Bowen had to work with, but in Bowen's season they managed to guide them to around 14th in the Championship, so there may have been a slight improvement on that with a few players coming in since. But yeah, around 10th I think would be reasonable for this Reading squad under Mark Bowen. Coming in 9th place, we then have Derby under Frank Lampard. Obviously Philip Cocu being their previous manager, but as he was in charge for this season, we've gone back to Frank Lampard. Now don't get me wrong, the quality of this Derby squad compared to what Lampard Lampard had to work with, it's absolutely nowhere near. You know, Lampard had the likes of Mason Mount, Harry Wilson, Tomorial to work with. But the one area that you do have to give Lampard credit for is working with youngsters, and what Derby do have is a lot of youth talent in that squad. So who's to say that he wouldn't have continued to get the best out of them? You know, he'd have had Louis Sibley playing in the form of his life in that number 10 role. And also take into consideration, if Rooney wasn't now the manager, he'd still maybe be playing for Derby in a sort of holding role. So he'd be pulling the strings with loads of youngsters in front of him. Yeah, why not? Derby 9th on the front Lampard. Coming in 8th place, we then have Nottingham Forest under Martin O'Neill. Now, Martin O'Neill's time at Nottingham Forest wasn't exactly the most thrilling ride for the Forest fans. He had them at a time though when they were in and around the top half of the table, sort of challenging for the top 6. They fell short under him and ultimately departed, and then went for Sabri Lamucci after. But I'm in no doubt that this Nottingham Forest squad, with the amount of talent that's actually in there, individual talent, that they have drastically underachieved this season. So who's to say that a manager like Martin O'Neill might not have got more of a tune out of these players? It probably wouldn't have been the most thrilling of years, but yeah, in and around the top half, why not? In 7th place, we then have Bristol City under Lee Johnson. Now, this one involves a lot of hypotheticals, so hold with me for this. Let's say, for example, that Bristol City didn't pick up the amount of injuries that they did this season. Suddenly, that's quite a competent squad for actually going and challenging for the top 6. Added to that as well, they have a bit more of an experienced manager in Lee Johnson opposed to Dean Holden, who was sort of learning on the job as this season went on. Then why not? We'll say they'll have been challenging for the playoffs this season under Lee Johnson, obviously. Very streaky team, Bristol City under Lee Johnson. You know, I wouldn't be surprised to see them go on a 15-game winning streak followed by a 15-game losing streak, which just sees them fall shy of that top 6. Coming in 6th place in that first playoff spot, we're going to have Swansea City under the management of Graham Potter. I think that everyone rates Graham Potter as a manager, really. You know, we've seen the work that he's done at Brighton since he's been at Swansea, and it was a good season he had with them in the Championship, obviously. Went on to finish 10th that season, and really was that sort of blueprint laid that Steve Cooper really managed to take that squad on to the next level there. But yeah, Graham Potter, very good manager. Swansea played some brilliant football along the way under him. In 5th place, we're going to have Cardiff City under Neil Warnock. Now, I know that towards the end of Warnock's tenure at Cardiff, things maybe just went a little bit stale, and obviously they parted ways in the end, went to Neil Harrison, since have gone to Mick McCarthy. But for a one-off season, give Neil Warnock that Cardiff squad. I think he gets them into the top 6, doesn't he? You know, he's done it before with Cardiff, got them promoted in that wonderful Championship season when it was them and Wolves, you know, really battling it out at the top of the Championship between them. He's a man who knows this league. That Cardiff squad's got an abundance of talent in there, and yeah, he gets the best out of them, doesn't he? Coming in 4th place, we're going to have Norwich City under the management of Alex Neil. Now, I mean, Daniel Farke's been at Norwich for so long now that it's hard to imagine a Norwich side without him, but previously to Farke being there, it was Alex Neil in the job. Now, this prediction very much depends on which version of Alex Neil you're getting, to be honest with you. You know, first season at Norwich really hits the ground running, gets them promoted via the playoffs. In the Premier League, they ultimately didn't have enough to stay up, and then things went a little bit sour towards the end of his tenure there. But, I mean, you all know, if you've been watching the channel for a while, how highly I rate Alex Neil as a Preston fan. It would be a different brand of football to what they're playing under Daniel Farke at the moment, and they may not run away with the league, and they have some pretty stiff competition at the top. But yeah, I reckon Alex Neil will get this Norwich side promoted via the playoffs, not via automatic. 3rd place, we're going to have Watford under the management of Nigel Pearson. Now, to be honest with you, I thought that Nigel Pearson was a little bit harshly dealt by with Watford towards the end of that Premier League season. Obviously, he came into what was a pretty difficult situation, and the way that they disregarded him towards the end of that season was pretty disrespectful in the end. But Watford haven't exactly been the leaders in terms of treating managers well and giving them time and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, we've seen this season what Norwich have done with sticking by Daniel Farke. Sometimes that chopping and changing works for a club, sometimes it doesn't. I think Nigel Pearson would have had a decent crack at it this season with Watford. But then coming in 2nd place and getting automatic promotion, we're going to have Brentford under the management of Dean Smith. Now, for me personally, this Brentford squad is more than good enough for promotion at this stage. I think they've gradually been building it up along the years, and with how brilliant Ivan Toney's been this season, along with how strong that spine of players is now for the Championship, it's a team that's always going to be competing around the top of the table. So fine margins make all the difference. And is Dean Smith a better manager than Thomas Frank? Yes, he is, because he's obviously been promoted from the Championship previously with Aston Villa. So I reckon Dean Smith will get this Brentford squad over the line. What do you guys think? But then that means coming in 1st place and winning the Championship, we have Bournemouth under the management of Eddie Howe. Now, like like I mentioned previously with Watford, the case study this season has been Norwich, you know, sticking by Daniel Farke and how well that's actually turned out for them. I know that ultimately it was Eddie Howe's choice to leave Bournemouth in the end and not sort of, you know, like them sacking him or anything, but had he stayed on with the abundance of quality in that Bournemouth squad compared to some of the other managers that we've previously been talking about, I think Eddie Howe will get Bournemouth back up at the first time of asking. You know, ultimately Jason Tindall's inexperience I think has told throughout the season. We're also seeing shades of that with Jonathan Woodgate as well, who's also fairly new on the block. Eddie Howe knows what it takes to be promoted from this division, and with the amount of quality in that squad, I think it happens for Bournemouth. But guys, there we have it. There was every Championship club and where I think you'd finish in the Championship table if your previous manager was in charge for the year. Do get your thoughts on this in the comments down below. Obviously this video was just for a little bit of fun really, but I really enjoyed compiling it actually, you know, looking into clubs' previous managers and stuff like that. So get your suggestions in the comments down below. If you went to enjoy, make sure to leave a like. But apart from that, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.